Welcome everyone to our monthly committee vodcast, and the last, can you believe it, for 2022. Our committee vodcast is a series of conversations with Strata committee experts about how to build and be an effective committee. The focus of our conversations will always be around the human factors rather than the legal requirements. We may touch on some things you need to be aware of, but we're not here to talk specifically about sections of the Act. In our earlier episodes, 1 to 7, we explored why people volunteer to be on a committee and their experience of joining a committee. What are the most important steps for a committee to do from day one, and managing your manager. Recapping, there were 5 important steps, and that was building relationships with your manager and each other on the committee, creating a work plan for the year, an action list to be achieved, creating handover from your past committee across to your new committee, keeping the communication open and transparent at all times, and putting together a recruitment pack or an induction pack for your new committee members as they come on board, and one for the chairperson in particular, so that they understand their role as well in that. You can view these recordings from past sessions and also get notification of our future committee vodcasts by subscribing to the SCA Inside Strata newsletter. If you just drop subscribe to Inside Strata newsletter into your browser, you will be directed directly to that site. It's too complicated to tell you how to get there otherwise, so just do that. In episodes 8 to 14, we've explored with David Hamilton preparing your building for EV, whilst still building on, of course, how to be an effective committee during that process. For our final episode about EV preparedness, because next year we'll talk about other different subjects, we've once again lucky to have David Hamilton with us. David has a lot of experience in multi-storey apartment living, because he lives there, and with a particular expertise of preparing consultant in the area, and so we'll recap those important messages. I'll drop those into the chat box so we don't have to go through them again. David is also one of the founders from Southbank 3006, which is a new owners networking group, which we will talk more about in 2023. So joining us as well is Catherine Leza, who's very experienced, also a lot owner, but also currently president of SCA WA. And it's great to have you back, Catherine. I want to start this time with the headlines. As you know, I like to see all the headlines and how, what do these all mean for Strata? In particular, the headlines that I've chosen this time all relate to the EV topic, and almost a sense of urgency now that is creeping around this topic. So I'm going to just give you a quick summary of what they are. The first one was in Driven, which was about BYD Dolphin, likely to be Australia's first sub 40,000 EV. Now, it's not an ad for that vehicle. It's about the cost of EV vehicles now coming below that inviting threshold of 40,000. The second is that the Australian federal government has passed its Treasury laws, which now is providing $2,000 off the purchase price for electric and, well, we're going to mention plug-in hybrid, but that sunsets very quickly, as well as, and this is the kicker, the fringe benefit tax exemptions for fleets and novated leases. And that's really quite interesting. Electric vehicles will also be prioritised in the government fleet purchasing decisions to both reduce government transport emissions and provide more electric cars to the used market. The popular replacement cycle for passenger vehicles are 36 months or 90,000 kilometres, i.e. 3 years. Another interesting, do you see the time? Why I find these articles rather interesting. And of course, the last one, not that it was announced exactly this week, but and David has mentioned this over time in our podcast, but I'm just going to mention it again, and that is the new requirements under the National Construction Code now, which commence for Victoria in October 2023, and I think they commence probably across Australia around about that same time. That must be space for switchboards and EV charging for 100% of the parking areas in apartment buildings. So these are very, very significant things. All of them have a timeline, of course. So, David, looking at those four headlines, and of course that overall bigger picture of the 2030 actual timeline, that 50% of light vehicles will be EV. Here again, I'll say Australia, but particularly Victoria's roadmap is that to achieve the greater picture of net zero by 2050. So 50% by 2030. It's only 7 years away. And that is not a big time frame for Strata to act for existing buildings in particular. What do you think of these new announcements and the timeline and, 7 years?
Well, I think, Julie, that all of these initiatives, or at least the first package of initiatives that you talked about, are all designed to change the supply side dynamic on availability of electric vehicles. Firstly, you're seeing the electric vehicles being given a preference in terms of government purchasing. Secondly, you're seeing electric vehicles being given a preference in terms of FBT requirements. There will be two impacts of both of those. One is that people who are doing novated leases will now have an incentive to move to an electric vehicle and away from another vehicle. The second is, this relates to government purchasing and fleet purchasing generally, which flows from the FBT. That cohort of cars will move into the aftermarket at a point in time, in 2-3 year time frames. And that's important because the aftermarket, that is the second-hand market, will become an important source of, and a low-cost entry point for people to purchase an EV. So I think that dynamic will get played out. So that's going ahead. The other time frame is also the commitment of the target of the Australian government with respect to reducing emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And that is going to become again a pressure point to get to by effectively 2030 to be able to deliver 2050. And so all of that 7-year crunch is something that buildings are going, and strata committees are going to have to consider. And I just, I was looking this week, because it's December, that a year ago I was working with, I think, 3 or 4 buildings in Melbourne. So I only work in Melbourne or Victoria. Now I'm working with 29 buildings. And the bulk of those have come in the last 6 months. So that it's almost like with the changes in policy coming out of Canberra in the last 6 months, that it's elevated the awareness into people's minds. And my final point on that would also be, well, new buildings, from October next year, every new strata development in Australia, every high-rise strata development above three floors will require 100% of that building's car parks to be able to be EV ready. And that will require the main switchboard to be have dedicated circuits, dedicated distribution boards, and dedicated cable tray. All of the things that an existing building has to put in and to retrofit it. And this is going to throw up this retrofitting is going to throw up a lot of challenges for committees. And I'm starting to now move into buildings which were built 30 years ago, 35 years ago. Those committees are facing issues about the main switchboards in those buildings that people never gave any thought to what was under the, in the back of the building. The electricity just turned up. And they're also, at the same time, they're now starting to address the whole issue of electrification, moving off gas, moving into a totally electric environment. So they're looking at, how do they get rid of all their existing boiler systems, the cost of that. So we as owners corporation members are going to have to face a whole raft of changes in the next 7 years. And in some ways, getting EV started now is probably a really good starting point for starting to think about making your buildings sustainable.
So David, with the difference between new builds, obviously they're going to have requirements, and existing builds where it's not a requirement, but everybody's going to be talking about it. So do you think it would just be totally market driven, as you're saying? Do you think it'll be that people will owners corporations will start coming to you and saying, right, we've had a few people ask about EV charging, what can we do? Or do you think they'll think that their buildings have also been mandated to upgrade?
I don't think people will think that their building's been mandated. I think what is occurring, what the statement is, there are two clear statements. People come to me and say, we've got a couple of EVs, we've got owners saying we want to be able to charge our car at home. That's been a sort of standard response. Increasingly now, buildings are coming and saying, we don't even have any cars, but we know we've got to do something. We have to get ahead of the curve. We know that new buildings will be kitted out like this. We view our building as a prestige building. And this is buildings that were completed like in the last couple of years.
So it's a choice. They're thinking about their choice for owners and renters and that kind of thing.
Sorry?
They're thinking about a choice?
I think they're thinking... very much it's been driven by thinking about for owners wanting at some stage to sell their apartment, but increasingly the word the renters will need to be. This will become an important issue for renters.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're just finishing work in a building where one of the first people to not only get wired up but install a charger doesn't live there. They're renting their apartment out, and they've taken the view this is going to make we'll get a better rent by being able to attract a tenant who will have be committed to staying longer and paying a higher rent.
Higher rent. Yeah, that's a very good idea. So tell me, with your 29 buildings, I know we talked a while ago about your timeframes. Is it getting quicker for people to install EVs and do go through the whole process?
I think that two things have happened. One is COVID has become less of a constraint
right.
Hopefully it's become less of a constraint for us in terms of getting work done. I've noticed, and maybe it's because we're getting more skilled at it, but buildings are now, committees, once they've made the decision, yes, we are going ahead, even at getting the report done stage, are appointing a couple of members of the committee that can be a reference point and can make and are empowered to be making the sort of nuts and bolts decisions that within an overall framework the committee set. Previously, it was this whole very slow, cumbersome process of here, here's a status report, now sit around waiting for a decision, back, forth. Now, I'm working with a couple of buildings where they've just said, here's 3 people, give us your project plan, go and implement it with them.
Yeah, so like a subcommittee, or maybe they might have had a motion at an AGM that said, we're going to establish a subcommittee, or we empower the Strata Council to go off and do the work and not have to come back to us, within the constraints.
That's
so
right.
Yeah, that's very sensible.
And I think that's really key simply because other buildings have got caught on a price spiral. As costs have risen, they were making decisions based on one package of cost here. By the time they got to the implementation phase, the costs might have gone up 10 to 20%. And that's a sort of that price shock you want to avoid if possible.
So David, just very quickly, I know over the last 7 sessions we've done quite a lot of work with you, but if you could just quickly highlight how committees investigate sustainability initiatives, just the main highlight points for everybody who may not have listened before.
Yeah, well, I think the starting point is to recognise that sustainability issues are a key benefit to a building, right? So that they are a key benefit because they will deliver savings. The capital investments will generally be repaid either in savings or in savings in electricity consumption or water consumption, etc. But they'll also generate benefits to owners through enhanced value to the property. So I think that's the first starting recognition. I think the second thing is, and we've talked about this, on a number of occasions, that is engaging with the community in the building and communicating with them on a regular basis about what the thinking is. And that may ultimately, when you're thinking about doing something, generating a survey, generating a feedback mechanism so that people feel involved. Not only have you communicated out to them, but you're giving them a mechanism to communicate back to a committee. On the specifics of EV, it's very much to have an open concepts in so that anybody can join, that the cost recovery mechanisms are thought through and set out for everybody, so that the benefit principles are applied to various parts of it. I think all of those things are the key elements to overcoming the consistent issues that get raised. Why should we do it? Or I'm not going to have an EV. I shouldn't have to pay. What am I going to benefit? They're often common things that come up in owners' corporations and give rise to conflicts and so forth. And therefore, it's a communication process. Communication out, listening, communicate out, explaining to people, these are the benefits, these are the reasons we are making these decisions. And people will feel involved. The more you can make people feel involved and bring them on this journey, then the happier they'll be.
And just for clarity, everybody, Julie's dropped into the chat a recap on the last 7 sessions in case you want to read it as well while David's talking.
Sorry. Sorry, Catherine, you can continue on.
David, just coming back to the comment about time frame and your experience now with the buildings that you have completed, could we just touch on that, the time frame from the start of the survey, that initial part of the survey, which, you know, basically then gives the committee to mandate it needs to go on further, to the actual completed product, and people are able to then charge in the building. Just so that they understand, it's not well, for some it will be longer, but the quickest time is probably your own building, but that was because you knew what you were doing.
Well, I think, Julie, one of the really interesting things is that some buildings start out with a survey, some come to a survey, and some decide never to do a survey, right? The survey I think the survey is good, but some people say, well, we don't need a survey. And you know, they've used a reporting mechanism instead. They might have meetings and so forth. But I think the time frame is, it probably takes to do the initial power and load analysis of the building and scoping out the technical stuff is probably about a month. From when it sort of gets ordered to when it finally gets delivered. And coming along with that is, I tend to provide a scoping report for people, which deals with the commercial and legal structures that go around this to enable it to work. So there's, and that is part of what I'm trying to do with that report, is to educate a committee about the technical stuff, which and demystify a lot of the ideas that people have. They might be, why can't we use the GPOs in the car park? Why can't I run a cable from my power board at my apartment to my car park? Why and how load management systems work to enable the sort of infrastructure to be delivered, and why in-car park charging with load management can meet the charging needs of all of the owners at some point in time when they're going to want it, assuming you've got available current to be able to get to devote to EV charging. So going back to your question, how long does it take? So about a month really to do the power and load analysis and scope up the technical infrastructure. Then there's probably at least a month to 2 months generally for an owners corporation to take that in and have an interaction with me and amongst themselves about what this means for us. Then, and included in that, we'll be working with their strata manager on how to fund it. What are our funding options? What are the approval mechanisms that we might need to go through? What are our powers to act? And that is the big checkpoint that they can then, once they've worked that out with their strata manager, they can then make the step of going forward and implementing. So then the implementation phase is really just a question of running a project. And that it's by the time you get various bits and pieces made, probably about a 3 month, should be about a 3 to 4 month activity. So that gives you the sort of framework of that. And then we should try and run in parallel towards the end of the implementation, a marketing program to owners to get them to commit to putting the infrastructure into their own car parks. Because otherwise, there's not much value unless you get the last component put in, which is an owner has to pay for, whether it be the cabling plus a charger or just the cabling. Once that starts to occur, that last bit, that interestingly leads to people making decisions about their car purchasing. They suddenly start to see, it is viable, I can do it, It is here. This is reality. Now I can go and buy a car, or I'll place an order for a car. Even if it may take it 6 months to appear, I can at least place the order for a car with confidence so it's giving people confidence that they can make that leap, and it become just a normal pattern. I personally think that over time we will see, it goes back to your earlier point, Julie, or my response to one of your first questions, this will become the norm in a building. If you haven't got EV charging, then I'm not interested in buying an apartment in your building. It's a bit like if you don't, in some time in the future have a neighbour's rating, then I'm not interested in purchasing in your building. And that just lowers the price point on those, because the demand for those buildings will decline.
Yeah, and of course, that's the significance of the 1st of October for 2023 for the commencement of newly built buildings. So the next door neighbour, with a 2-bedroom unit, the same view over the Yarra River, is now in a building that is already EV enabled compared to my apartment, which isn't. And therefore I need to adjust my expectation around what I'm going to get or sell my apartment for on that basis. So that I think, I don't know, what do you think, Catherine? But I think that's going to become a big driver.
I think that's huge. Yeah.
We've seen it happen with the maintenance plan, just by the introduction of a maintenance plan. I know when I recently was looking at purchasing a property in Queensland, the first question I asked was, what is the state of the maintenance plan? As in, how much money do you have one? How much money's in it?
Yep.
And was interested in one that didn't have one.
It's interesting. If you think about pools and gyms, we know that not that many residents generally use the pools and gyms. Okay, we know there are stats around that. Whereas a lot of states, it's very normal to have a car, and it's going to be so common to have an EV car in 10 years that we can't even imagine it now. It's going to be a disincentive to move into that block if you don't have one. Yep.
I think, in fact, it'll be much shorter, Catherine, than 10 years. I mean,
okay, I was being generous. Yeah.
I mean, just as an aside, VW, which doesn't currently sell a single electric vehicle in Australia because they haven't been able to get stock from Germany, they are saying that next year they will introduce their first run of electric vehicles in Australia. They are prioritising SUV, and the production quota that they are taking is over 7,000 vehicles for the Australian market as a first year run of just one model of vehicle. So that you will see, VW worldwide is just fading out of internal combustion engine cars. Hyundai is making the same. All of the major manufacturers in the world, American, Japanese, most of the Japanese, definitely the Europeans, it's a goodbye, good night, Irene, to an internal combustion engine.
I think I saw a stat that September's third highest selling car was a Tesla.
Yep.
So, yes, I agree.
It's quite interesting. Right today, you want to buy an EV, you can walk down and go to your local BMW dealer, and they'll have a vehicle that you can drive away in. They actually have stock. And it's not me advertising BMW, but they actually now have you can walk in and drive away capability on an EV model. Volvo from 2025, no more internal combustion engines, just EV. So they're that's the sort of paradigm shift that is occurring, and owners in buildings will expect it because they don't want to have to drive miles on a regular basis to charge their car.
That's a really good point. I think the expectation why can't you do it in an apartment building?
Yeah.
There's going to be an expectation, especially people who are new to apartment space, who are moving from a house to an apartment. They're going to totally expect that that is one of the things that they can do, and they're going to be shocked that it's one of the things that they can't do.
That's right. And they will turn up and they will plug it into a GPO in the car park, and then there will be a fight.
They will try to plug it into a GP in the car.
Oh, believe me. I've seen them plug it into a GPO. I've seen them run cables down the outside of a building.
I know. That's one of the ones on the list about, making sure you do it the right way, not the wrong way.
That's right.
Believe it or not, we've managed to spend our time chatting about EV preparedness. So a great thank you to Catherine for joining us again for our last podcast, and David, for you for, in particular, giving up your time to share all your experience over the last 7 or so sessions. It's been great. I hope we can rely on you to come back in 2023, because it's always interesting, some of the conversations we have. So that would be fantastic. Our next podcast will be on February the 3rd, so Friday, February the 3rd, from 12 to 12:30 again. We will welcome back Nick Abbey to our group of experienced committee members to share his thoughts on particularly focusing on committees and effectiveness, and how we can do what we do better going forward. And I'm sure there'll be some interesting and stimulating conversations generated there. So I wish everybody, thanks for everyone who's tuned in today. I wish you all a great Christmas, a new year, and a holiday season from everyone at Strata Community Association. And again, thanks to all, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thanks.
Thanks all for joining today.